The prayer wasn't written for history. It wasn't meant to be discovered, quoted, or turned into something symbolic. It was written because there was nothing else left to hold on to. In the frozen trenches of the Eastern Front, where the ground was too hard to dig and the dead were too many to bury, this sniper sat alone with a pencil that barely worked and a scrap of paper torn from a ration booklet. Around him, the war had lost all structure. Orders came late or not at all. Time blurred into a cycle of hunger, cold, and waiting. And in that silence between artillery strikes, he wrote what might have been the last honest thing he would ever say. He didn't write like a soldier. There was no mention of duty, victory, or the enemy as a faceless evil. What spilled onto the page was something much closer to a confession. He wrote about the weight of watching men fall through a scope, the strange distance it created, and how that distance made it easier to kill but harder to live with afterward. He admitted that at first, he told himself he was protecting his unit, doing what had to be done. But the longer he stayed alive, the less convincing that justification became. Each life taken stacked up quietly. Not as images, but as a dull pressure in his chest that never went away. Faith enters the prayer hesitantly. Almost awkwardly, like someone knocking on a door they aren't sure they're allowed to open anymore. He doesn't speak with certainty. He doesn't claim righteousness. Instead, he asks questions. He wonders whether prayers still count when spoken by hands that have ended so many lives. He wonders whether God watches the battlefield at all. Or if war is a place even heaven turns away from. There's no demand for forgiveness, no expectation of it. Just a tired hope that maybe being honest still matters. What makes the prayer so unsettling is how human it is. This isn't the voice of propaganda or legend. It's a man who admits that he has learned how to detach in order to survive. And that detachment has frightened him more than the enemy ever did. He writes about moments where he felt nothing after a kill. And how that emptiness scared him more than guilt would have. Because guilt meant he was still himself. Emptiness felt like something else entirely. Like the war was slowly replacing him with a quieter, colder version that didn't ask questions anymore. He mentions the cold often, but not just the physical kind. There's a cold that settles into people when they realize the war doesn't care how brave or careful they are. Friends disappear overnight. Names stop being spoken because there's no energy left for mourning. He writes about how prayer used to be something done before sleep, something comforting. Now it feels like a final statement. A last attempt to explain himself to someone who might still be listening. There's a line where he admits he no longer knows what he's fighting for. Not in a dramatic way, not angrily. Just honestly. The slogans he once believed in feel distant and hollow out here, where survival is decided by inches and seconds. He doesn't deny responsibility for what he's done. He doesn't blame commanders or circumstances. He simply asks whether a man can be shaped by a war so completely and still be judged as the same person he was before it began. The prayer shifts at times into memory. He recalls small, ordinary things with surprising clarity. The sound of boots drying by a stove. The way bread tasted when it was fresh, the feel of clean water on his hands. These memories aren't nostalgic. They're grounding. They remind him that a world existed before this one, and might exist after, even if he doesn't. Writing them down feels like proof that he once belonged to something larger than the trench he's currently frozen into. What's striking is that death isn't described with fear. It's described with exhaustion. He doesn't ask to be spared. He asks for rest. Not sleep, not survival. Rest. As if staying alive has become more draining than the idea of dying. That alone tells you how deep the war has gone into him. When death becomes a quieter thought than tomorrow, something fundamental has shifted. He writes about the men on the other side too, though briefly. Not as enemies, but as mirrors. He imagines another sniper somewhere across the frozen field. Also waiting, also thinking, possibly also praying. He wonders if they would recognize themselves in each other if the war weren't standing between them. It's not a moment of moral clarity or sudden peace. It's just a flicker of recognition that everyone here is trapped inside the same machinery. Whether they admit it or not. The prayer ends without resolution. There's no dramatic final sentence, no declaration of redemption or damnation. It simply stops, as if he ran out of strength or time. That abruptness is part of what makes it powerful. It doesn't try to tie meaning into a bow. It leaves the question open. Unfinished, much like the lives around him that ended mid-thought, mid-sentence, mid-breath. Within the flow of the video, this moment serves as the emotional core. Not because it's tragic, but because it's quiet. War stories often focus on movement. Charges, explosions, turning points. This prayer captures the stillness where the real damage happens. The internal reckoning that doesn't make it into reports or medals. The realization that survival alone doesn't mean escape. And that the deepest wounds are the ones carried out of the battlefield, not left on it. As the narration moves forward, this prayer lingers like an echo. It reframes everything that comes after. Every statistic. Every map movement. Every strategic decision suddenly feels heavier when you remember there was a man sitting in the mud, asking whether his soul still counted. It reminds the viewer that history isn't just shaped by generals and borders, but by millions of private moments where individuals tried to make sense of the unbearable. And perhaps the most haunting part isn't what he asks for, but what he doesn't. He doesn't ask to be remembered. He doesn't ask for his side to win. He doesn't ask for meaning to be imposed on his suffering. All he wants is for someone, anyone, to understand that he tried to remain human in a place designed to erase that entirely. Whether that prayer was answered is something we'll never know. But the fact that it was written at all tells us that even in the most dehumanizing conditions imaginable, the need to be seen, forgiven, or simply understood never fully disappears.